Hi, my name is Stacey Bell-Lynn. I spent 20 years working in local news, and 13 years ago, I married an NFL player turned coach, Anthony Lynn, and joined the world of NFL superwives. I've always loved hearing about the life behind the headlines. It's where you find the common thread that connects us. That's what I want to do here. My husband played and coached for the Broncos and 49ers. He's currently the running backs coordinator for the Commanders. We've moved 6 times across the country for his various jobs. When I first met my husband, I didn't know anything about football. I just loved the commercials and the snacks. Well, trust me, that's changed. In my new NFL world, the wives became my family and confidants. It is a sisterhood that transcends teams and rivalries. In each episode, I'll talk with a significant other of a player or coach, the football wives who hold it all together. We'll get real and give you a behind-the-scenes glimpse of it all. This is the world that I want to share with you. Welcome to Super Wives of the NFL, their inside stories. Let's kick it off. Welcome back to another episode of Red Zone Queens. I'm Stacey Bell-Lynn, and I'm joined by Hayley Elwood, NFL reporter. Thanks for joining us, Hayley.
Thanks, Stacey. Really excited to be with you now in week 8. Crazy. Here we are.
Crazy. Now, you're an NFL reporter, but you're also doing double duty tonight, which is why you're all glammed up.
Yep, we are glammed up today, baby. It is NBA opening night. One of my many jobs as I work for the Los Angeles Lakers is their in-arena host. This is my 3rd total season with them. So it's kind of funny. And this is like a little piece of advice if there are any people listening and want like sports media advice. But I had worked for them back in 2015, which was Kobe Bryant's last season. And I was living in San Diego at the time, and I got the job. And my boss at the time was like, "Can you drive up to LA for this?" And I'm like, "I got you. Don't worry." And I never missed a game, and it all went great. And then after that season, which was a lot, obviously, because the drive was a lot, and I was working for the Chargers, I, said, "Hey, I think, I'm good." And then 9 seasons later, they called me and said, "Hey, we have an opening. Would you want to come back?" And here we are. So now we're in my 2nd consecutive season, and the NBA tips off tonight.
And see, you never know. Like, you make those connections, and that's why they say don't burn a bridge, because you might have to cross it again.
Exactly. The sports world is so incredibly small, whether it doesn't even matter what sport you're in, because even there's so much crossover between sports. I mean, I worked with people at the Chargers who worked at the Lakers who came from other teams too. And so you just truly, truly never know. And it might be the smallest world there is, maybe next to like the entertainment industry, but you are so right. You cannot burn a bridge, treat everyone with kindness, everyone with respect, because you never know what might come around the next time.
Okay. All right. Let's dive into the games this week. Both of our teams, not so great. We'll talk about the Chargers first. You guys saw, our former coach who was on our staff when we were there, Shane Steichen, came in with the Colts, and they are hot.
They are hot. This, you and I talked about this game last week, and sort of under the guise of, are the Colts for real? The teams that they had beat were not particularly quality opponents. They had beat the Dolphins, the Titans, the Cardinals, and the Raiders, teams that don't have a lot of wins to their name. They did beat the Broncos, though, however, which was probably the next best team next to the Chargers. So this was obviously going to be a huge test, purely based on quarterback play alone. Can the Colts defense stop Justin Herbert? The flip side, though, you mentioned it, Shane Steichen, who was longtime assistant coach with the Chargers, became a coordinator and really was, as the kids like to say, in his bag in this one. I mean, Daniel Jones looked like an MVP candidate out there. Jonathan Taylor had 3 touchdowns on the day. He also, I believe, right now has 11 touchdowns, which is the most of any skill position player in the NFL. They are just efficient. And Shane, I remember when he was with the Chargers, predicated everything on having his team and his guys play faster and not have to think as much. And that's sort of the vibe that I got from watching the Colts play this past weekend. You look at also someone like Daniel Jones, who was a great draft pick, didn't really fare well in New York, had to kind of, he got released last year, ended up signing with the Vikings as a backup, and is now sort of reinventing his career at this point. And under the tutelage of someone like Shane, I don't think there's a better situation out there. You look at someone like Justin Herbert, who had his best year probably under Shane, someone like Jalen Hurts, who was phenomenal under Shane when Shane was the OC in Philadelphia. So really, you're kind of seeing that same sort of MO that Shane has, sort of tap into these quarterbacks and get the best out of them. So the Colts are on a roll. They really made Justin Herbert feel uncomfortable a lot of the day. He did end up, though, passing for the most yards he's ever passed for in his career. He had this insane game, but it almost was just too little too late at that point, and they lost by 2 scores. But the Colts now lead the NFL at 6-1, and I think you can look at them and say they're for real at this point. I'm not sure what else they need to kind of prove, but they really put it all together and played an extremely complete game this past Sunday.
And that, I think, at the beginning of the season was something that no one saw coming.
No one saw coming. I mean, this was a team that truly, there was talk potentially about, do they have a high draft pick? Would they have maybe a top 10 pick going into 2026? And Shane obviously had sort of a rough go last season with Anthony Richardson. He's doing it right now with Daniel Jones, and he is now, I would say, like a coach of the year candidate. He might be the coach of the year at this point in the season, just given what he has done with this franchise. It has been really, really incredible to watch. And we'll see, again, kind of what happens as they progress through the season. But at this point, like I said, I think that test against the Chargers was sort of a benchmark that they needed to kind of check off the list, and they handled them. And I saw the Colts play a couple weeks ago against the Rams, and it wasn't as clean of an operation. They got a couple guys back on defense, which I think certainly helped them this week. But, it looks like they're just kind of hitting their stride at the right time, and they're not losing momentum at all, which is what you want to do right here now at borderline the halfway point of the season.
Okay. So you mentioned coach of the year. I'm going to throw out another name that I hear a lot and I'm reading a lot about online, Kyle Shanahan. They had a win over the Falcons Sunday night. And, that team they're hitting their stride too, it seems like.
They are hitting their stride, and they are every week you talk about losing some key player. I mean, their defense has just been so depleted. They've also been playing without Brock Purdy for weeks now. I know he came back at one point, but then I believe he came back and then had to go back out. But Mac Jones, again, another guy who's just sort of reinventing himself at this point in his career. And I think you think of Shanahan, obviously, in that same vein as Shane Steichen, is just an offensive-minded guy who's going to get the most out of his players and the most out of his quarterbacks. And you're seeing that with Mac Jones. But just the fact that they were able to do what they did, without Nick Bosa on defense, without Fred Warner, who was hurt about a week ago, just really, really incredible. And I think sometimes the Niners are one of those teams, though, that almost has like perennial success. And you sometimes don't think of them a little bit as maybe having to kind of fight for recognition, if you will. And they have made Super Bowls recently and things of that sort. But to your point, what they are doing right now with, I don't want to say necessarily so little, but so much less than what they started with at the beginning of the season is incredible. And the NFC West right now is hot. I mean, sans the Cardinals, you have 3 teams that if the playoffs started today, they would all be in the playoffs. The Niners, the Seahawks, and the Rams. So whatever happens with those 3 teams as the season progresses is going to be extremely interesting, and see if they can beat up on each other, and maybe 2 will survive, or hey, maybe all 3 will get in at the end of the day.
Okay, we'll talk about another tough game. I'll let you talk about it, a tough loss. The Commanders lost to the Cowboys. Just brutal to sit through. Normally, I told you earlier, normally I'm watching from home and I can turn the television, even to Lifetime is more fun to watch. But I was kind of stuck there in the stadium and I had to watch that. That was tough to watch.
That's a tough go. At least you weren't getting rained on, though. I'll say that. That was probably a plus. Plus, we talk a lot about obviously divisional games and how sometimes they're a little closer than expected. Sometimes unfortunate things happen and they're just not. And so I think if you talk about maybe Coach of the Year candidates and you want to talk about potential MVP candidates, Dak Prescott right now is playing great, great football. And he's another guy I just think sometimes he gets paid like a top guy in this league, but sometimes he's not the first guy you think of off the top of your head in terms of one of the top maybe 5, top 8 quarterbacks in the NFL, but he is certainly playing really well. And you and I mentioned Brian Schottenheimer a couple weeks ago and just the impact that he's had. And it feels like the Cowboys, though, getting CeeDee Lamb back was obviously something that they needed just for that offense to kind of get things going. And right now they're 3-1. So they have absolutely been able to turn things around. They play, I believe is it the Broncos this week? That's a really good game.
That will be good. Yeah.
If they do, let me just,
I can't remember.
Yeah.
But yeah.
It is Cowboys Broncos. So that is actually a pretty great game getting into week 8. But I think you're just sort of seeing the Cowboys now sort of come together the way a lot of people envision them coming together. But, it might have taken a little longer. And obviously a new head coach, things happen, but here they are hitting their stride.
Okay, so the big game that you wanted to talk about coming up for this week is the Sunday night football game.
Yeah, so week 8 doesn't have a ton of, as I like to call, sexy matchups. There are 6 teams that are on a bye this week. So already you throw 6 teams out of the equation that are not playing in week 8. And you're seeing a lot of matchups that feature teams that have large win totals versus teams that have very small win totals. For instance, the Buccaneers are 5-2. They go up against the 1-6 Saints. The Bears are 4-2. They go up against the 1-5 Ravens. So what are we talking about? Let's talk Sunday night football. So you have the Green Bay Packers at 4-1-1 are currently leading the NFC. And even though they have only 4 wins, it's because they have 1 loss, and every other NFC team has at least 2. So they only have 1 loss. They're atop the NFC versus the Pittsburgh Steelers at 4-2. And Packers head coach Matt LaFleur on Monday spoke with reporters and said, look, this is the Green Bay Packers versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. This is not Aaron Rodgers versus the Green Bay Packers. That is for you guys to talk about. So Stacey, let's talk about it. Because
I forgot Aaron was there last year, right?
Aaron was there for many, many years.
Yes.
So the story goes, the Green Bay Packers draft Aaron Rodgers in 2005. He has to sit behind Brett Favre. Once he assumes the starting role, he goes on to be a 4-time league MVP, Super Bowl champion. And then in 2020, history repeats itself. The Green Bay Packers draft Jordan Love, who ends up having to sit behind Aaron Rodgers. Rodgers, after 3 years, Green Bay decides, hey, Love's our starter. He's ready to go. They trade Rodgers to the New York Jets. Rodgers spends 2 seasons there, not the greatest, tears his Achilles in season 1. And then this past offseason ends up signing with the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think it's kind of great because I love the concept of the Steelers and Packers. First off, they met in that Super Bowl that Rodgers won with Green Bay, and just 2 legacy franchises is pretty cool. But this is the first opportunity that Rodgers is going to have to go up against his former team. And I just think the schedule makers knew exactly what they were doing when they put this one on the schedule before Rodgers had even signed with the Steelers. They were hoping that it was going to happen, and it did. And so I think at this point, you look at these 2 teams and you go, okay, how do they stack up? And I think the most interesting part to me about Pittsburgh is they're a team that for many, many years, the steel curtain, their defense, it's usually so strong, so stout. And they've kind of waned a little bit. Rodgers in the Thursday night game a week ago against Cincinnati, he had 2 picks, but he had 4 touchdowns. So he still is, can play at an extremely high level. And he had the go-ahead score up until the end where the Steelers allowed Joe Flacco to go down the field and ultimately let the Bengals kick a field goal to win that game. They also gave up over 142 rushing yards to Cincinnati. So can Green Bay kind of capitalize on that? That's what I'm sort of looking for in this matchup. And then the flip side for Green Bay's defense, Micah Parsons, who you and I have talked about over the last couple of weeks, incredible game against the Arizona Cardinals, career game, 3 sacks. Can he get pressure on Rodgers? Can that Steelers offensive line hold up against Green Bay's defense and defensive pass rush? Rodgers also a little older now. He doesn't totally have the escapability he once had, but I just think this is going to be such a great matchup. I love Mike Tomlin. I just think he's one of those incredible coaches in the league. And I just think this is kind of everything that you hope for. And hopefully the game lives up to the hype, because that's all we want. We just want the game to match the hype going into it.
That's going to be a great Sunday night game. And then we, the Commanders, have the Monday night game against Kansas City. And it feels like they're hitting their stride as well.
Man, they are totally hitting their stride. And we spoke last week about the Chiefs being able to get Rashee Rice back from suspension and what that was going to mean for that offense. And it meant everything. It absolutely meant everything. They blanked the Raiders last week. Patrick Mahomes took a seat in the 3rd quarter. I mean, he didn't play. They stuck Gardner Minshew, their backup quarterback, in during the 3rd quarter. And to think that a starting quarterback in week 7 could just, sit back and relax for essentially like a quarter and a half or so is crazy to think about. But it really does feel like they needed all of those pieces, right? The first few weeks of the season, they were not playing with their full complement, their full roster. And really no one is, obviously, given the fact that injuries happen. But to get a guy who was healthy now back into the fold, it just means everything for that group. Their defense also, I think Steve Spagnuolo does an incredible job, and just the way he schemes. And I've talked to many Chiefs players and reporters over the years, and they say as the season goes on, it feels like Spags gets stronger and his defense gets stronger. So no disrespect to the Commanders. We'll see what happens in that game. But I just think this is, the Chiefs, here we are in week 8. They're still sitting right out of playoff contention because the Jags currently would hold that last spot, and the Jags have the tiebreaker over Kansas City. But I don't think there's anyone who would sit here right now and be surprised if in 2 weeks Kansas City starts working their way back in, because they're the Chiefs. And here we are.
Exactly. All right. It's always so much fun talking to you. Oh, and I have to give a shameless plug for my podcast, Super Wives of the NFL. We have Kia Tomlin, Mike Tomlin's wife.
Yes.
So he's going to be my guest on the podcast this upcoming, I think it's going to drop Friday. So hopefully everybody will look for that, because that's a nice tie-in with the big game Sunday night. But I could talk to you for a long time about this. You're so easy to talk to and so knowledgeable about this stuff, Hayley.
I love it, Stacey. Thank you so much for having me. Hey, I love Kia too. She has done an amazing job with women's apparel in the NFL and really capitalizing on that space and being able to design awesome clothes for multiple teams. And I just think that's so cool. Someone who's been around the game for so long, using talents in an alternate way to get other people involved and on board, I just think is so cool. So I look forward to listening to that one for sure.
Great. Thank you so much. Have fun at the Lakers game tonight. And we'll talk next week. Recap what happened this week in the NFL and look ahead to, is that week 9 already next week?
Week 9. It is week 9. We will be more than halfway done with this thing, which is crazy.
All right. Hayley Elwood. Thanks a lot, Hayley. Have fun tonight.
Thanks, Stacey. Appreciate it.
Okay, thanks for listening, and thanks in advance for liking this podcast and leaving a review. Meet you here next week.